Welcome to Learning Photography with Duck. Here's your host, Duck.
All right, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Learn Photography with Duck. I am your host, Duck. And today, as you can see, it is Photoshop week. Unfortunately, I do not have a lesson planned out for today. One, I was a little busy last week. I couldn't quite get to it. My bad. I apologize. But two, it kind of, as I was trying to come up with something for today, I said, you know what? I've been doing kind of these pre-planned events the past several months, and we really haven't had a good Q&A about Photoshop. And I figure, maybe we'll take advantage of today and open up the platform for you guys to go ahead and ask questions. Because I'm sure, after everything that I've been tossing out for the past several months, you may have some questions that you say, well, I don't know how to do this, or how do you do that, or I've encountered this particular problem. How can I resolve it? So I figure we'll do it, kind of like a Q&A. But what I like to do today, before we start, I want to give a couple little announcements. Milford Photo, man, my voice is starting to go already. Haven't even started. Allergy season. Milford Photo is hosting me for a Beyond the Rule of Thirds Zoom session on Tuesday, October 5th at 6:30. If you want to learn a little bit about composition, not only the, getting away from the basics of the rule of thirds and exploring some other avenues of image composing, and not just geometrically within the frame, but also psychologically with the structure and placement of objects, with the choice of colors, and more importantly, with the choice of negative space, which a lot of people don't quite really think about when they're thinking about a composition for their image. So if you're looking to learn a little bit more about image composition, you might want to check this out. It's 2 hours. It's a slideshow presentation, so I get to do a lot of talking. Yay. And then a Q&A afterwards. So, if you're interested, hit up Jesse over at Milford Photo. He'll get you registered, or you can go on to the meetup page for Milford Photo and sign up from there. Also, and it looks like I'm cutting off a little bit there. Those of you who are on the Facebook page will have noticed that I've been kind of putting out a little feelers. One is because of the previous poll that I put out about the type of photography you guys like to do. Overwhelmingly, it was about landscape, and second in line was street photography. So I figure, let's tackle those two. So I'm putting together a little photo meetup where we get to go out and photograph the fall foliage that's coming our way. Probably either towards the end of this month, beginning of next month. So it's not too far away. And I just posted a Facebook post earlier, and I have about 5 different locations picked out. So, we'll see how it goes. So if you're interested in that, keep an eye out on the Facebook page for information. And once we get an official date for some of these locations, I'll put it into the events page. The second one is about street photography, and I figure I'll push the envelope, because I've noticed that whenever I've done any kind of street photography in the past, the number one thing or the number one hang up that a lot of people have is approaching strangers. And I figure, well, you know what? Let's do a workshop where we kind of break you free of this fear, and we'll do a workshop on street portraiture, where it's just you, your camera, and some random person that we pull off the street. So these are going to be little workshops. I have 3 locations picked out. So hopefully we'll be able to get, enough people in different areas that is closer to you, rather than you having to travel long distances to come to the workshop. I want to keep the workshop small, maybe about 6 people. So stand by for that. Also, I just put out a poll regarding that portraiture. Whether you're interested in doing, natural light portraiture, or if you want to get into doing street portraiture with a speed light in a softbox, so that way you have a little bit better control of the light. I think that aspect is scaring some people, which, I can understand if you're a beginner, especially with photography. You don't want to complicate things with speed lights. So right now, currently the poll is natural light is winning out over using speed lights. So stand by. I have the 3 locations that I have currently picked out is downtown New Haven, downtown Waterbury, and Hartford. That little green, or that little park across from the Science Center. I'm missing the name of it right now off the top of my head, but right on the river. And those are the 3 locations. I don't have a date for them yet, but they'll be sometime soon before it starts getting, too cold. Okay? All right. So that's it for my announcements.
It's called Riverside Park.
River. Oh, of course, easy enough. That's probably why I couldn't remember it, because it was so obvious. I've been there on a couple of occasions, and it's a great little park. It really is. You can, it's built on a hillside. If anybody's never been there, right on the bank of the river. And it goes literally from street level all the way down to the river, and there's walking paths. There's a little kind of like a amphitheater seating section. It's a great little place. So those are the 3 locations. So again, I haven't picked a date for those, but I will post them in the events page, and I'll probably post a rain date. Just in case, because the weather's starting to get a little funky here. Okay. So what I'd like to do is open up the forum, I guess you can say, for questions. If anybody has any questions that they need answered.
I have a couple of questions, Doc.
Sure.
If I can share my screen, I have a couple of photos that I'd like to talk about. Is that possible?
Yeah.
I will share. And let me do this. Let me do that. And where did I put it? Oh, there we are, flowers. Remember I told you I have I bought a macro lens?
Yes.
Okay. Let's just take this picture. I figured, I went out, and that's not the one I want. Let's get a good one. That was a good one. There we are. Let's take this picture here.
Okay.
I went taking pictures of flowers yesterday for the first time I used that lens. I know the flowers don't look that good. I was trying to get the feel of which aperture setting I should use, shutter speed, and then figure out the ISO based on that. Shutter speed, because it was a little bit breezy. So
Yes.
this is all new to me, but something like I determined that for the most part, f8 is the best for this particular lens. f11 is okay, but I think f8 is better. The average picture of a flower I would take would either be this, or that, or that.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I wasn't in the best of position because I was in a garden, I couldn't step on things that I could destroy things. And I was also being careful of sometimes I wanted to block the photo with my body so it's darker and see how it comes out that way.
Right.
And sometimes I wanted to do stretch my body so I can get a flower. But let's talk about this one. When I took the picture was very, very light, and same with all of these others. And I made the flower actually darker in Photoshop. What I did was, the background was very light.
Mm-hmm.
So, pardon me, what?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So what I did in this case is I used to select the subject, which was the flower, and then I inverse so I can do the background, play with the background, and I had to do some other selection, deselection. Then I made the background the way I wanted it.
Mm-hmm.
Then I went back to this flower. It's a horrible looking flower, but again, I was trying to get used to the camera,
Right.
what stop I want and all that. But this picture was this flower was a lot lighter than how I ended up editing it in Photoshop, and I made it dark to be like this. Do you think this was the best way to do post-production? Or should I have made it lighter or even darker, the flower?
How available is the original flower? Can you share that?
Oh, I'm using this thing that somebody. Let's go to the original flower. Here we are. Here's the original.
Okay.
There we are.
Yep. All right. So you also did a color shift on it, made it a little bit redder, correct?
Yes, I did. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
He was creative.
It was creative. All right.
The flower, my attitude is with a flower, I'm not doing journalism here. With a flower, I can play with it any way I want it to look like.
Right. Okay, so let me see if I can find a flower in my collection here.
By the way, I'm using Fast Stone, which that person mentioned on the call for Milford Photo the other day.
Okay.
And I because this is in the way. Hold on, let me get that out. Oh, no, I'm in the way. There we go. Because as you can see, if I go to the right, it shows me the settings. As you can see, I did F8 ISO 400.
So that's what? That's just an image viewer?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I use Earthen View. It's pretty lightweight and pretty fast. Nothing in terms of editing capabilities, but I don't use a viewer for editing.
Same here.
Okay, go ahead and unshare.
All right, hold on one second. Oops. How come? Oh, there we are. It's up there. I have unshared, right?
Okay. Yep. And
good.
I will go ahead and share mine. There we go. Let me. Okay. Everybody see my screen okay?
Now, yes, we can.
All right.
We see other things below it, like audio mixer and that type of stuff.
Oh, wait a minute. That's not the... Okay, why is it not sharing my other one?
It's like we're doing a radio show here.
I know, huh?
See the VU viewability.
All right. What are you seeing now as my share?
Same thing.
one?
Yeah. I see you on top, and I see a whole bunch of sources, audio mixer, control, scenes.
All right. How's that? Okay. There we go. A little bit better. All right. I thought I had it figured out. It throws a monkey wrench into it.
There we are. We got it.
Okay, good. All right. So I have a little flower here with a light background. Okay. So there's going to be two considerations when it comes to any kind of photography, whether you're shooting flowers or people or events or whatever the case. The first consideration is what you do in the field, meaning how you capture the image to get the results that you want. Oftentimes, you want to have some kind of pre-visualization before you hit the shutter. That way, when it comes time to edit, you're editing towards something that you've pre-visualized in your head. But we know the reality is we don't always get that kind of pleasure when we're out just randomly photographing things, especially when you're out and your goal is just to test the capabilities of a lens. In that case, I assume what was happening was that you were pushing to see what the lens can do, and the subject and the quality of the image was secondary, correct?
Yes.
All right.
As you can see, it was a horrible flower.
Yeah. So one of the things that I tell people is you want to have enough data in your capture that's going to allow you to manipulate it in post-production in any way you can. Even if it looks really nasty in its raw, unedited format, oftentimes, as long as the data is there, we can bring out the beauty from it. All right. The problem is when you start getting into extremes. And I guess a better way to say it is you have to take into consideration how much latitude you have when you capture that data. All right, so for something that is very light or looking overexposed, we know that if we crush, if we crush the data.
By the way, Doug.
Yeah.
I looked at the histogram and I was able to see that the pictures that I ended up choosing, they all look good on the histogram.
Right. However, all right, even though they may be within certain areas that, especially within the subject, if, for example, they need to be closer to the midtones range, all right, or the middle zone, when they are overexposed, they tend to go into the highlights zone. Okay, and then what we need to do is we need to drop it down. But what happens is, even though to our eye it looks overexposed, there are shadows. And you've heard me use the analogy of the spring, where one end of the spring is your whites and the other end of the spring is your blacks. And if you move one part of the center, it affects the entire the entire spring. It's kind of the same way here. When we have something that is on the edge of that exposure latitude, and it doesn't matter if it's not crushed left or right, all right, even if your histogram looks good. If we need to shift more than a few points, then things start looking a little funky, right? Because now we're dealing with the highlights, but as we're correcting for the highlights, you got to understand that we're working globally at first to try to get our exposure under control. When we work with the highlights, it is also affecting the midtones and the shadows. So any manipulation we do in the highlights, it's going to transmit, kind of like that spring, into the midtones and shadows. All right.
If I think what I did with that flower, the red, I went to luminance and I rolled the luminance instead of being a basic and changing the highlight.
Okay. Yeah. So luminance is going to drop the light aspect of it without really affecting the colors. All right. So if all right, so now we have to think in terms of physics in this respect. And we've all noticed that when the light is very, very low, we have a very hard time seeing colors. Colors kind of become very dull and muddied and very difficult to distinguish, right? If we go the other way, when things are too bright or overexposed, things look very washed out, pastel-y, right? So what happens is that washed out look or that muddy look in the shadows gets baked into our image if we are too far from our latitude. And now when we try to wrestle it in, all right, this is where the havoc gets created, because we're forcing something to now drop in luminosity value, but also regain color value that is just on the edge of not being there. Okay, so for example, the color red. If we wash it out, it tends to go very, very pale, kind of like pink, right? Pink is not red when we really think about it. If we were to take pink and increase the saturation and drop the luminosity, we're not going to get red. We're going to get a darker pink. Follow? All right? So this is what I mean by you have to watch your latitudes and have an understanding of where you want to be for your edit. All right? So by default, I usually tell people that you want to expose, bless you, you want to expose to get your highlights properly controlled. Because when you drop your exposure, you're literally removing noise. Okay? Whereas if you have something that's underexposed, in order to bring it up to a proper exposure, there's a tendency of increasing noise. All right, which is kind of like the opposite way of thinking with film. Back in film days, we wanted to preserve our shadow detail because we can reclaim our highlight detail a lot easier. With digital, it's the opposite. It's very easy to lose that highlight detail. And then once it's lost, it's very, very difficult, almost impossible to regain. Okay? And this goes not just for the luminosity aspect, but also for the color information. Right? So there are going to be trade-offs, and we have to be aware of these trade-offs when we're out in the field. And you have to say to yourself, okay, if I am losing information in the background, it's not that critical because it's background. If worse comes to worse, I could probably put something else from a different image in its place to correct it. What's important is the subject, right? So I always tell people, you want to make your goal is to get the best image quality that you can of your subject out in the field. Okay? Doesn't always happen. All right, and you probably know this as an event photographer. Sometimes things move so quick, we don't have a chance to really get our settings dialed in. It's just an impulsive reaction. We grab the shot and we cross fingers. At least we got the shot. All right, and if we need to make modifications in post, well, we deal with that later. Okay, but that's a different story. All right, in this particular case, if you have the time, try to get your, not just your exposure, but your colors dialed in accordingly. All right. So in your particular case, what you did is you shifted the luminosity. And the reason that doesn't work is because what I mentioned earlier, all right, it doesn't really affect the color information. The luminosity is all about the light, and it's just going to make something that's light gray a little bit darker gray. Okay, and it's going to affect the colors. It's going to make whatever color information is there is just going to make it darker.
Oh, before I did the luminosity, I did play with the highlights. I pressed auto, and then I played with that. So I did take care of highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks.
Right.
Initially, before playing with the luminosity.
Okay. Yeah. So that would be what I would suggest is try to get the most out of that raw file while you are in your either Adobe Camera Raw or in Lightroom. Okay, and we have a lot of tools available. We parts, such as highlights, whites, shadows, darks, and our exposure. So if you want to think about it, just think about it in terms of the zone system, the Ansel Adams zone system. But in this case, we have 5 zones. We have our whites, highlights, our exposure, our shadows, and our blacks. Okay, and once we understand, we can look at an image and say, okay, well, this area back here is right on the cusp, and my Lightroom is not responding. What the heck happened? There we go. It's right in between, right at the edge of going from middle gray into our highlight section. All right. So this background, I know it's going to be adjusted by as well as my exposure. All right. And you can see just by making a short little move in my exposure, it's really affecting that gray in the background a lot. Whereas if I make a small move, whoever's got their mic open, could you please close it? We're picking up some background noise. All right. If you just you'll see that it's affecting it, but not as greatly. All right. Sorry, Brian, I have to mute you. All right. So the first step would be to try to get it as close as possible to your final edit in Adobe Camera Raw as you can, or in this case in Lightroom before you go into Photoshop. Okay, this will alleviate a good 50 to 80% of your issues. So that way, when it comes time to open it up in Photoshop, you can just concentrate on those really bad problem areas. Okay. So in your particular image, what I noticed was that there wasn't a cohesion between the foreground color and the background color in yours. There was a very distinct edge on your flower that kind of made it look like it was cut out and just kind of pasted there. Okay. If we look at an image that hasn't been manipulated, there is what's called aliasing, however you pronounce it. I can never get that one right. Where the background color and the subject color makes this little transition. All right, and sometimes, depending on the lighting and depending on the type of color combination between background and foreground, there might be a little bit of a halo. All right, you can see a little bit of a halo here. All right, a little bit of a halo here, where we have yellow of the flower, and then that little bit of a halo is kind of orange. It's a little darker orange before it transitions into that background color. All right, this is normal in every image that you take. But what happens when we start pushing too far in one direction or the other, whether we're manipulating the colors or whether we're manipulating the light artificially in post, this highlight or this halo edge, the edge transition, starts deteriorating. All right. A classic example of this was when HDR was, in its infancy and taking off. A lot of the overprocessed images had this really crazy luminosity halo around everything that just made it look glow in a very unrealistic way. Okay? So, in your particular case, what you want to do is you want to manipulate the luminosity to make it a little bit darker without affecting this edge transition too much. Okay, so now becomes a little bit of a balance game. Right? How can we do that without it looking like a cutout or without it accentuating the halo? Well, one of the things that we can do is obviously capture something, within what was it? Mental block. I'm having a hard time today. Within the latitude of color and within the latitude of exposure out in the field, right? But when we can't, we need to keep a close eye on that in our post-production, right?
What happened with that particular flower is, and I normally wouldn't go this way. I would look for a background that was as light or as dark as the actual flower. But in this case, because I was trying to play with the new lens, I was shooting down on the flower. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so the sun was still hot. Mm-hmm. And the ground did not have grass. It had more dirt than anything else, which made it very light.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we work with what we got. All right. But just to kind of touch on something that you just said, where you said you try to even out the background with the flower. Yes. I would say, I would even suggest, don't think of it in that respect. I would look on how to create more of a contrast between the flower and the background. Whether the background goes a lot lighter so that the flower stands off. Okay, usually with darker colored flowers, this works best. All right, so for example, if you take a red rose, maybe drop that background significantly lighter so that red rose stands out. Or the other way around, as in the case with, something this light, where you might want to drop that even darker so that the flower stands off.
Let me ask you a question on that as far as breaking rules. You said make the background lighter to give more contrast to the flowers, but I've been told that your eye goes to the lightest thing in your picture.
Aha! Ha, ha, ha. Yes. Yes, typically. All right. Here I'm going to do this. Okay. See if I can do this. All right. This is just quick and dirty. Okay. Quick and dirty. Where's your eye go? Is it going to the brightest spot or the darkest spot?
It's going to the darkest spot.
All right.
Maybe
Why? Why?
Because that, to me, I'm not a flower person, by the way. To me, that's the center of the flower, and it has more of a color to it than the yellow, as far as I'm concerned. The yellow.
Okay. It's actually a lot simpler than that. All right. Where you, in this particular case, we're using contrast of a dark object against a white field. All right. So yes, typically our eye tends to go to the brightest part of an image, as long as that image is middle gray or even a little bit darker. All right. If the background is dark, then yes, the brightest spot is going to really attract our eye. But it's a matter of percentages here. In this case, we have 90% bright, 10% dark. So it makes that 10% really come forward. Okay. All right. So it's still, believe it or not, it still uses the same principle of that rule that you just quoted. It's just that it's the inverse of the light and dark, but it's the same principle. Okay. In this particular case, it goes to the most prominent object, which in this case happens to be dark against a very light background. Okay.
Okay.
If we were to reverse it, all right, see if I can reverse this. All right. All right, and again, this is down and dirty. Where does our eye go? Same spot. All right, yeah. Because we're using the law of contrast. All right, where in this case it just happens to be light on a dark background. Okay, and then if we isolate it just to the flower, all right, our eye is drawn to that black spot because it's the law of contrast. Black on light, dark on light. Okay. All right, so here we have light on dark, and then within the subject we have dark on light. Okay, so this is a bit layered, all right, but that's the concept, all right. So, but still, this doesn't. This kind of does play into yours, because if we were to convert yours to black and white, all right, let me just reset this. if we were to convert yours to black and white, what part of your image stands forward?
Black.
The black. All right. Well, no, your image on your flower. Okay. There's a lot of midtones that are competing for your attention there. Okay. And so what you need to do is you need to kind of force the image to make a decision of what you want to present. Okay. So rather than present a wall of neutral colors, you want to present something with a little bit of contrast, so that way the subject stands forward, all right, from the background. Okay, so in your particular flower, all right, you were manipulating the luminosity, but you were manipulating them so that they both reach towards that middle gray. Okay, if you were to create a separation in the luminosity between those two elements, you would probably get a much stronger flower image. All right. So either you push the background lighter than the flower or darker than the flower. Obviously, your choice. Both will work, as I demonstrated here. Okay. But the trick in your particular case, aside from that element, there's also the technical aspect of it with your masking. The mask edges were a little bit too sharp, so that we see this kind of like cutout aspect to the flower.
Should I do it better?
Yeah. Because again, if we were to zoom in on an unedited image, you can see that it makes that very nice soft transition from one color to the other. It's not like there's a sharp white edge here and then we go into gray. Follow? Okay. So we need to, I usually, depend, how much feathering you apply is definitely going to be dependent on the size of your image. If you're working, this case, 5.4 K image, I'm going to give it maybe a feather of, 4 or 6 pixels. All right, so that I get a nice smooth transition in comparison to working on something that's half that size, where I might go with maybe a 2 or 3 pixel feather in order to make that transition. But the nice thing is in Photoshop, here, let me reset this and open up in Photoshop. Blacks up, shadows up. Okay, I'm going to make this little thing pop forward here. Shadows, bring the shadows up, blacks up. Maybe add a little bit of contrast so I don't wash out my blacks. Okay. Let's do a square, just so we're not playing around with too much. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and edit in Adobe Photoshop. I am going to go ahead and switch over to Photoshop. And I'm probably going to stress my system right now. There we go. Okay. So now I say to myself, okay, I want to increase the contrast between my foreground element, which is the flower, and my background element, which is kind of like this gray and this vegetation underneath and this background flower. All right. So right now, this background flower here is competing with my main subject simply because they both share the same luminosity as well as the same silhouette. All right. And what I mean by that, let me get a brush here. All right. What I mean by that is that we have a circle and a circle. And then here we have a circle and a circle. All right. So they both share the same silhouette. All right. Which just confuses our eye. It's like, okay, what do I want to look at? All right. So by default, we want to look at something that is in sharp focus, which our main subject is, in comparison to the blur. However, okay, there are two other elements, all right, the luminosity and the silhouette that are also competing for our attention. So we need to address that aspect of it, okay? So first thing I want to do is I'm going to make a copy of it, all right? And I'm going to go ahead and add a mask. And just for speed's sake, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to see how well it's going to cut out that. Oh, did an awesome job. Okay. Actually, you know what? I'm probably not even going to do it the way you do it. All right. I know that probably just sounded pretty harsh. I'm going to do it with a curves adjustment. Okay. And because I had something cut out when I created my curves adjustment, it's going to automatically create that mask for me. Okay. So now I can control that part of the image. All right. Now in this case, what I want to do is I want to control my background. So I'm going to take this mask and I'm going to invert it. Okay. Let's see. I just do Control I, Command I for you Mac people, and inverts it. So now when I select my curves adjustment, everything I do here is being affected to the background. Okay. So now if I lighten it up, you're going to notice that there's this funky halo going on around. All right. Disregard this little here. All right. Obviously, I would suggest to you spending a little bit more time than I'm doing right now to make a more perfect mask. All right. But you notice how it's got this crazy halo from the mask, right? And that's because what we've done is we've altered the background so that as it's making the transition in the original image, as it's making the transition from yellow to that orange in between color for our background to that gray, we've now artificially created a lighter background so that transition is no longer natural looking. All right. So what we need to do is we need to make it a little bit more natural looking. So one way to do this is if you double click on your mask, it's going to bring up your mask properties. Okay. And if we go down,
And you're on the subject itself now, not the background, right?
No, I'm on the mask.
Okay.
I'm on the mask. It doesn't matter what the mask is masking.
Okay.
All right. In this case, our consideration, yes, is the edge transition between subject and background in this particular example. Okay.
Okay.
But this is going to apply to any mask that you create. All right. And if we go down, you'll see where it says global refinement. Global refinement. Okay. And right here. All right. And the first one says smooth. The next one says feather. And the next one says contrast. All right. And then it says shift edge. Right. And why is my spotlight not coming out? Okay, Something always has to go friggin' wrong here. What's going on? Did my spotlight disappear for you guys? I'm still seeing my spotlight. What the heck?
I still see the spotlight over the smooth feather and contrast.
Yeah, and it's... Damn it. And it's not disappearing. What the heck? Give me 1 second, guys. Let's find out why this is... Let me turn it off. There we go. I had to cut my application. I hung up. Okay. So we have smooth, feather, and contrast. All right. They each do one of... they all affect the edge transition of the mask. Okay. The first one is smooth. All right. So if we look at our mask, you'll see that it's very jaggedy because I applied an auto mask, meaning that the AI followed the edge of my subject as best that it could, and it just, wherever the edge led it, that's where it went. And because we're dealing with a raster, it's going around pixels. All right, so we're going to get a bit of a jagged edge all the way around. So this first one, smooth, helps to smooth out those imperfections along the edge. All right, so you can see now how all of a sudden that's gotten a lot smoother. Okay, we still have a bit of a halo, but we've smoothed that edge. Okay, and the next one is where we now can work on our edge transition, and that's the feather. The feathering is, in the most basic of terms, think of a gradation between the black of the mask and the white of the unmask or the non-mask, the see-through areas. Okay. Typically, a mask will be black and white, all right, and any shades of gray will be a reduced value of transparency. All right, so we have black, which is 0% transparent, to white, which is 100% transparent. All right, so a value of 50% gray will be 50% transparent. So in order to make a smooth transition, we want a gradation along our edge from 100% black through ranges of gray to 100% white. And that's going to avoid that kind of like scissors cut out clip art paste in look. All right, so we can do feathering. Now, how much feathering you apply is going to depend on two things: the nature of your subject that you're masking and the resolution of the image you're working on. All right, and it's usually going to be a very low number if you're working with a small area. And it's going to be a very low number if you're working with a small size file as well. Okay. If you want the transition to be super, super smooth, you're going to give it a wider feather. And this will be something that you might be using more with like landscape photography, where you want to get some kind of soft light manipulation. In this case, we want to kind of sort of follow that edge of that flower, right? So now you can see that we've really reduced that halo look and that cutout look, and we're getting a more natural transition between the flower and the background, okay? right? And of course, I also have an overlay. If I don't want that overlay, I can just go to my view mode, all right? And I can say, you know, show original, or I'm sorry, show, let's see, the marching ants, okay? All right, or the onion skin, okay? I kind of like the overlay simply because it lets me know where my mask is, okay? So,
Feather, you made, I can't see that well. Is that 2.1?
yeah, it's about 2.5 pixels, okay? You can go to 3 pixels, all right? But you have to be careful because if you go too far, it starts looking a little bit unrealistic, all right? Now we're getting, because it's going to build that transition from the edge inward, okay? And you can see now that as it feathers off towards the white, it's actually encroaching into our subject. So we have to be careful with that, all right? We can correct for that if we want a softer transition, all right? Let's say, you know, we want, you know, let's, for example, put 6 here, okay? We can come down to our last one, which is shift edge. And all this does is it shifts the edge of our mask into or outside of our mask area, okay? Let's see if it'll showcase it here. Yeah, all right. I'm in need of a new computer. That's definitely for sure. My graphics card can't keep up with all this anymore. It's not even showing. It's not even showing the shift edge. All right. But what it's going to do is it's going to shift that edge inward or outward, so that way you can manipulate that feathering, that edge feathering, so it avoids all this haloing on the outside. Okay. All right. So, and then of course, contrast is how much contrast you create along that edge. Okay. So you can really sharpen an edge just by adding a little bit of contrast, and all that does is it introduces contrast within that, just that transition from black to white. So anything that's gray, it just increases the contrast. All right, and then I'm going to go and hit OK. And yeah, see, it shifted it inwards. All right, so I'm going to go back out. I'm going to feather that edge. There we go. That's looking a little bit better. All right, there we go. Okay. And that will help alleviate that scissors cut out and pasted in look of your image. Okay. Now, another trick that you can use, all right, again, the end result is only going to be as good as your, excuse me, is only going to be as good as your mask. If your mask is relatively good, but you're going to see maybe there's a couple edges where it's not quite as good, while you are still on your mask layer, you can always go to your your smudge tool, okay? And you can use that smudge tool to move that edge, right? See how I'm kind of moving that edge? You can use your smudge tool to move that edge and get rid of any little areas that are problematic. All right? So you can fine-tune your mask edge in that respect. Okay? So for example, here, this edge is very prominent. I'm going to go ahead and just touch that in very, very, very small. You can see that I got my strength at 100%. All right. But if I go to my brush settings, you can see that I am very, very soft brush. Very soft brush. All right. So I just do short little dabs into it. And it's like finger painting. You're just kind of moving that edge in and out as needed. All right. And that's going to clean up the edge on your flower.
Quick question: your edge, your brush rather, is a lot bigger than the edge. Is there a reason why you made it that big?
Yeah. I want a brush that is going to. All right. Actually, here I'll show you. If I make my brush too small, okay, notice how it makes really small. Okay.
Yes.
I don't want to affect just 3 or 4 pixels. All right. I want to affect a wider length of that edge. Right. So I'm going to make my brush large enough to be able to manipulate. All right. So now see how it kind of just moves that edge.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And because I'm using a very soft brush, the sharpest part is, or the most concentrated part is going to be at the very, very center part of this brush. And it's going to really, really soften out into that edge. All right. So if I just use that edge of that circle, it's really not going to affect anything because I have a very soft edge. All right. So that's why I'm kind of going and moving in. All right. And what that does is it allows me to very, very gently maneuver that edge. See? Very gently moves it in. All right. If I were to use a harder brush, let's go to a harder brush. Okay. You can see how it's just at the edge of the brush, it's just not creating that soft transition. All right. So now if I'm pushing in and out, back and forth, it's going to start creating these weird effects on my edge. See that? Okay. So you want that soft brush. Okay. Well, now that I destroyed that edge, let me come up here. Okay. I want a nice soft brush. All right. And all this is doing is, in effect, what it's doing is it's incorporating that layer effect, in this case, the curve. It's allowing that curve effect to come in and overlap onto my flower a little bit so that it makes that transition more natural. I guess that's another way of explaining it. All right. But it's all about that edge transition. Okay. So we zoom out. All right. You can see how it looks. It doesn't look cut out. It looks like it belongs there. Okay. And if we turn that off, turn that on, we can see how that flower just pops forward, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now, obviously, I didn't do a very good job at masking. All right, because I'm trying to do this quickly for you. All right, but we will want to spend some time. Oh, oops. Let's go to my brushes. There we go. Okay. All right. And then you can use the same principle to tone down this background flower, right? So in this case, I'm going to do it a slightly different way just to show you that there's multiple ways of doing this. I'm going to create another curves adjustment, and I'm going to pay attention just to this flower back here, all right? Just to the flower, okay? And I want to drop it down, all right? And I just grabbed the top corner, okay, of my curves, and I brought it down. And
So how did you? Can I ask you? How did you apply it just to that back flower and not a little spoon?
oh, it's doing it to the whole screen, all right? If I turn that off, you'll see that everything is being affected,
Okay.
all right? But as I am doing this, I am only looking at this flower,
Gotcha.
okay? I'm only, because the effect that I'm going to apply is only to this flower. So I don't care what it's doing to the rest, because I know I'm going to be applying this. I just want to see how dark do I want to go with that flower, all right? And that to me looks good right now. Keep in mind that you can change this later as you get into your manipulation a little bit more, okay? So right now, my mask allows me to see the effect, and I don't want to do that. I want to concentrate on just that little flower. So I'm going to invert my mask, Control I, invert it, okay? And then with a brush, let's see, I got my brush. I'm going to make it a little larger, all right? I have black as my foreground color, okay? I want to change that to white, so my default is black and white. I'm just going to, you can toggle it here, right? Or you can use the letter X to toggle back and forth. I want white as my foreground color because I'm going to be painting white onto a black mask, all right? So make sure that your mask is still selected. And here now, I can go ahead and just paint on this, all right? And you're going to notice that it's looking pretty terrible, okay? And that's because I'm using a brush that has a very hard edge to it, all right? Very hard edge, all right? So, you know what? I can say, yeah, all right, let me see what I can do, all right? But I would definitely suggest using a brush that's got a soft edge, all right? And then, of course, the more to the white you get, all right? See, now we've gone to that point where our flower no longer is neon yellow, okay? But our edge is very nasty. So we can do a couple of things, okay? If I do Alt, or Option for you Mac people, Alt and click on my mask, I'm going to see the mask, okay? And you can see how it has kind of like that hard edge, okay? Because of the type of brush that I used in this particular example, okay? I'm using a very, it's one of my painting brushes, okay? I just grabbed it, okay? But what we can do is we can go to Filter, Blur, come on, Blur, Gaussian Blur, okay? And then we can incorporate a little bit of blur to that. Hit OK, come back out, all right? And then that little trick that I showed you with the smudge tool, all right, go back to my mask, make it a little bit larger, definitely make it a very soft brush, okay? And we can go ahead and any problem areas, just get rid of it. All right? So this is kind of like down and dirty. Down and dirty. Okay? But you can see it doesn't take that much effort to manipulate very specific parts of an image. Okay? And like I said, you'll want to take time with your mask. Don't rush it like I am. Okay? But even this, quick and dirty, you can see how it just tones it down. Okay. Now I'm looking at it in relation to the rest of my scene. That looks a little bit too dark. All right. It's starting to look a little washed out. So all I got to do is come back out to my curves adjustment, and I can say, okay, I'm going to darken it down, maybe bring my more shadowy areas up a little bit. Okay. And make adjustments. There we go. Okay. Before, after. Before, after. All right. And if you need to, you can double click, add a little bit of feathering. Hit OK. There we go. Make sense? All right.
Yes.
And then if you just group these two, and then that's before, that's after. All right. So what we're using is the law of contrast in this particular case to make a light object that's against a dark background to invert to become a dark object on a light background. Right? And in this case, it's an extreme manipulation. Oftentimes, obviously, you'll want to play with what's there, but it can be done. Okay? Does that answer your question, Bill?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it does.
All right. And again, you can apply the same principle to just about anything, whether it's portrait, whether it's a flower, an animal, or still life. Okay? Same principle. All right. Hopefully that helped other people too. Any other, again, that was an awesome question. Any other questions anybody has? Either on what we just did or something new?
I have a super basic question because I really just started using Lightroom and Photoshop even more recently than that.
Okay.
It's best to get as best you can in Lightroom
Yes.
before Photoshop, correct?
Absolutely. Lightroom and Adobe Camera Raw will take the raw data and manipulate it in a post-processing aspect. All right. So basically, there's two stages to editing digitally. Okay. You have the raw data, which is basically just a bunch of ones and zeros. Whatever the camera caught, that's what it caught. All right. And then in order for us to be able to view it, it needs to convert it to a JPEG. All right. Or some other form. All right. So typically it's a JPEG. For editing purposes, when we are editing in Photoshop, we will be editing a TIFF file. All right. A TIFF file is just a file that has a lot more information in it, more data than a JPEG. A JPEG tends to strip out a lot of information. What it does is it says, okay, this pixel and this pixel, they're only 2 points of a value away. I'm going to make them the same. All right. And that way, and because of that, we get kind of like these clumps of similar color. Right. And depending on the quality of your JPEG, you can actually see the edge of where one color ends and the next color begins. Okay. So you don't want to be editing in a JPEG. You want to be editing into something that has more information. All right. So for Photoshop uses a much bigger workspace. Okay, and it's typically, think of it like a TIFF file. All right. So we have a raw file and we have the TIFF file that's going to be going into Photoshop. All right. So now what we can do is we can take that raw file, immediately convert it to a TIFF file and say, okay, here you go. All right. But any edits you make at that point will only be to that TIFF file. All right. So they said, oh, wouldn't it be great if we can manipulate that image before it gets to Photoshop? So they say, okay, here's the raw file. All right. We're going to lose some of that information in that raw file when we convert it, but can we manipulate that data to our advantage? So they gave us the tools in Adobe Camera Raw and in Lightroom and says, okay, this is what you can do to that raw file before we export it for editing in Photoshop. Okay? So it allows you to get a lot closer to your end result right directly from that raw file. So that way when it comes into Photoshop, the process is a lot easier. You're not fighting against bad editing to begin with.
Okay.
All right. So yes.
Let me ask a question that expands on that. Donna uses Panasonic, I use Canon, and I use Panasonic. I use Panasonic. Panasonic is, I believe, in Parkland, and Canon is CR2.
Yeah.
I don't know if I know this is different.
Probably, yeah.
Okay, but is it best to take the picture and convert it to, what's that?
DNG.
Is it best to convert to a DNG before editing in Lightroom? Okay.
Personal preference. All right, so each manufacturer has their own proprietary way of collecting the data off the sensor. Okay, so they have their own way of interpreting how that sensor sees light. All right. And it might be a little bit different than, Canon might be a little bit different than Nikon. Nikon might be a little bit different than Sony and so forth. All right. And sometimes it's noticeable. Like, for example, I've noticed that Nikon sensors tend to capture skin colors a lot better than Canon sensors. Whereas Canon sensors tend to deal with nature colors a lot better than Nikon. But that's just my perception. I could be wrong. Okay. Again, my eyes are a little funky. And then Fuji, may have a different way of structuring their color profiles as well. Right. However, that's all in the raw file. Okay. When it starts being exported to a common format like JPEG or PNG or TIFF, what it now has to do is it has to translate those colors into its respective color assignment within the JPEG or the PNG or the TIFF. Okay? And this is where you're going to notice color shifts between one sensor and another, because Fuji may take the color purple and make it a little bit more saturated than, say, an Olympus, right? So when it does translation, we notice that Fuji's color purple is a lot more vibrant. It's just a translation, right? So now we say, okay, well, what's with this DNG format? Okay. Well, the DNG format is, all it's doing is it's taking that raw format, keeping it, whatever camera created it, keeping it, and say, you know what? We're not going to call it CR2 and NEF for this camera brand and RW for RW2 for this brand, and whatever it is. We're going to unify it, and we're just going to call it DNG, which means digital network, digital negative. Okay, and it was Adobe's attempt at trying to get all the camera manufacturers to be on the same playing field. That's all it was. It never took off, but a lot of people use it simply because it allows them to very easily share their images out of from one person to another, and they're all going to be dealing with the same raw platform, which is Adobe. Okay. Rather than, running into compatibility issues where, somebody may have an older version and says, well, I don't have the raw converter for that CR2 file. I can't open that image. Okay. Once it's converted to DNG, it now becomes, in essence, an Adobe raw file, and then anybody with an Adobe product can open it. So it's not something that took off, but there are people in the industry that will convert everything to DNG, and I'm one of them. All right. Is there a benefit? None whatsoever. In reality, there's no benefit.
I have to ask this question because I know Donna works in Olympus. You know Darlene from Northaven Camera Club. She bought an Olympus. She's not happy with her Olympus, and she talked to an Olympus expert who I think you might know, and I don't want to say her name in case Darlene got this wrong, but Darlene said that this Olympus expert said you have to edit in their software instead of Lightroom. How accurate is that kind of a statement?
Yes, it is very accurate. Yes. Again, we're talking about raw converters. A raw converter converts all those zeros and ones into some kind of color space that we can read. Okay. Adobe has their version of a color converter. All right. And it says, okay, the difference between these grays here, this number math, the way we handle the mathematics behind the scenes is going to give us this color. Okay. But we know that in actuality, this color cannot be replicated in an sRGB monitor. So we're going to assign it to this color, which can be. It's close enough, but it can. All right. Olympus may say, all right, well, while that may be true, we understand our own mathematics a lot better, and we feel that instead of going here, it should go here, because this gives you a truer representation of that color. All right. So there are small differences like that. A lot of people may say, well, it's splitting hairs. A lot of people will say, no, you know what? I'm seeing better results from my native raw converter, meaning it's by the company that made the sensor, in comparison to a third party like Adobe. So yes, there is validity to that statement.
So should a person who has an Olympus camera, should they be editing in the Olympus software first and then go to Lightroom or ACR and then Photoshop to make better edits?
My answer would be, if it matters that much to you, then yes. If it doesn't matter, it just doesn't matter.
So you're saying to use like the Olympus software and then go to Lightroom and
correct.
then go to Photoshop?
Correct. or you go from the Olympus. So you go from Olympus into Lightroom, and then you can do your edits in Lightroom, or you can go from Olympus right into Photoshop and do your edits there. Okay.
I was surprised when Darlene said that.
Yeah, but no, it's very true. It is very true. However, you have to think about what is going on behind the scenes, and that is it is a translation of raw data into a color profile. If we look at, let me go over to Lightroom real quick. Let me share this. All right, where's my Lightroom? Lightroom. Okay, why isn't it showing? Oh, there we go. Okay. All right, so here's my image. Okay. Right here, we see profile. All right, and it's. Huh?
We don't see it.
Oh, I'm sorry. There we go. How's that?
It's coming.
Yeah.
It's coming.
Coming in?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Right here in the basics panel. All right. Mm-hmm. Literally the first part is profile. It's a color profile. Okay. It's going to take it off of the camera information. All right, so this is coming straight from my camera. And this is being applied by the camera software. All right, so what it's doing is Adobe is translating the color profile that's assigned by the camera here. Okay? If you go through your camera's raw profile, it's going to do the same thing. All right, but what I want you to see is when I click on this, I can view other profiles. Okay, so I don't need to stick to that one that came off the camera. I can apply others. All right, and the reason I would do this is because I want to get to something that represents my final results. Okay, whether I want something bleached out or whether I want something that's a little bit more saturated. Okay, so in essence, I am disregarding any color profile that Canon at this point that Canon has assigned. I'm going with something completely different. I'm going with something that appeals to my eye, okay? So more than likely what's going to happen, even if you use, for example, the Olympus RAW converter, right? And you say, okay, bring it in with the colors that Olympus says should be there, you're going to be changing them anyway, more often than not. You're going to be making them lighter. You're going to be making them darker, a little bit more saturated, a little less saturated. You're going to shift the colors of the green in the background to something that appeals more to your eye. So how hung up do you want to get on whether something is an original color profile or a third-party color profile? It's and the way I look at it, it's kind of like splitting hairs. Okay. However, the proof of the pudding is in the results. All right. So you might try both ways and say, okay, according to my workflow and how I envision the end results, I get better results right off the start if I use the native raw profiler.
I tend to use profile, and I choose either camera standard or camera landscape to start.
Yeah, but in the Adobe product.
In the Adobe, yeah,
Right.
in the Adobe.
Right.
Yeah, when I go, can you go to that screen again? I just want to make sure I'm saying this right.
If you do the same thing with, for example, the Olympus Adobe Raw, the Olympus Raw profile converter, it will also have their own version of that process. All right, they will have. You can select, the Olympus portrait, Olympus landscape.
I do the camera landscape or camera portrait. Now I'm assuming it's saying that I took it with a Canon camera. So when it says
Correct.
Am I correct on that?
In Adobe, yes, it's going.
Okay, good.
It's going to pull. All right, you can see here the first one is Adobe Raw. So this is going to say, all right, this is how Adobe interprets the colors, all right, with Adobe Color. But that's not the only way it can interpret it. It can interpret it this way, or it can interpret it this way, or it can interpret it this way, all right? So they're all very subtle changes. Some will have a little bit more contrast. Some will have a little bit more vibrance, okay? Some will have absolutely no color. It's how it interprets the data that's coming off that raw file, okay? So this is the way Adobe handles it, and it gives you a lot of options. If you were to open up the Olympus Raw editor, it's going to give you a lot of options as well. And it's going to be their version of how it interprets the colors. And there are going to be subtle differences. Some will be a little bit more contrasty. Some will be a little bit more vibrant. Some will be a little bit more saturated. Some will not even have any color at all.
But in this case, like for me, if I'm on here and for camera matching, Adobe knows I have a Canon and it'll deal with the Canon.
Correct.
If Anna goes on this same screen with something that she took in her Olympus, it's going to look at camera, faithful, or whatever, and say, hey, she used an Olympus. And
Correct.
Canon and great, okay.
Correct.
Now, if Donna does this, if Caroline does that take away the need to start with the Olympus software first?
You don't need to use the Olympus software to open up a raw file. All right. So I think I get where you're getting the confusion. All right. So let's suppose we took an image of this flower using an Olympus camera. All right. And I open up in Lightroom. All right. And it's going to have my camera matching. And it's going to pull all the profiles off of my Olympus camera, and it's going to display them right here. All right, and Olympus has Olympus Faithful, Olympus Portrait, Olympus Standard, blah blah blah. Right? You follow?
Mm-hmm.
Now, at the same time, I'm going to open up that very same raw file in the Olympus Raw program. And it's going to show me Olympus Faithful, Olympus Landscape, Olympus Neutral, and so on. But if I compare Adobe Faithful, Adobe's Olympus Faithful to, say, the Olympus software's Olympus Faithful, there might be some differences. All right, Olympus may render the color purple a little bit differently than Adobe renders that color purple. Okay?
We're thinking those differences are going to be very subtle, right?
They're typically very subtle.
Also,
right?
Also in the case of Darlene as compared to me, I don't know about Donna, Darlene does a lot of printing. So
Yep.
she might be fussier than somebody who does things for the web or for email. Or
Correct. All right. So here's where the situation can get really technical. All right. She's using an Olympus camera, and she's printing on an Olympus printer. Okay. Well, let's pretend that she does. Okay. We know that in the background, Olympus is going to do their best to make all their photographic equipment work together. Okay. So their color profile that they apply to their cameras, it makes sense that they will also use that color profile for their printers, because they know what their sensors can do. Right? So they're going to make sure that their printer can print relatively realistically from what their sensor captures. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So because we're going native to native, all right, at that point, it may make better sense to keep everything within the family and say, okay, well, I shot this with an Olympus camera. In order to retain the faithfulness of that color interpretation, I'm going to open it up in Olympus software that also uses the same color profile as the printer I will be printing to. Follow?
Yes.
So in that case, it may make sense, in order to retain image quality and color fidelity, to keep it all in the same family workflow. All right. However, most of the time, we don't. We don't. All right. And also, we have to understand that even the colors that come off the raw into our screen editor, they are going to shift to a certain extent when we print it. Because no matter what, we are working with an additive process when we're looking at the screen and converting it to a subtractive process when we print. So because we're shifting media, there's definitely going to be a color shift to begin with, all right? This complicates more if we're using, for example, an Olympus camera, but printing on an Epson printer. We now have to convert all those colors to the Epson profile. So it doesn't matter what color profile you started with if everything's going to shift over. The answer is going to be very subjective. Some people say, yes, it does matter. Some people say no, because I'm making all these changes along the way. All right. The only thing that matters is getting into that color profile that is actually going to be doing the print. Because I want, as I'm editing, I want the colors that I edit, I want them reflected realistically in the print. Okay. And this is where, print tests come into play. All right. Do we really need screen tests? Well, yeah, obviously, we want our greens represented realistically on the screen, okay? But often than not, we're already editing into that right from the beginning, okay? So, like I said, it's subjective, all right?
And then you add in, like, I have color monkey for color calibrating the screen. So
yeah. So, it's splitting hairs in my opinion, so what? All right. Adobe and Olympus can't quite, come to terms with what color purple that purple's supposed to be. In the end, doesn't matter. All right. How important is that color purple to you? If it's very important, then that's going to really dictate what workflow you follow. If
That must be-
purple
that
is
must-
purple is purple,
That must be tough for you as a graphic artist when you get work that you have to do for a company and you have to deal with the company logo and the colors have to be exact.
yeah. Depending on what it is that I'm working on, though. All right. Let's go back to my flower. All right. Let's say I'm working on something that needs to be a very specific yellow. Okay. And I said, okay, well, we need to make this a very specific yellow. All right. So I photograph it. They give me the flower that's that very specific yellow color, and I photograph it. Well, there are a lot of things that are already influencing that very specific yellow flower before I even start doing any editing. And that's the light that's hitting it. All right. So the light has to be very, very neutral, color neutral, in order to be able to capture as close as possible the yellow of that flower, right? Okay. But if we look at it, all right, let me see. Is this yellow here the same as this yellow here?
No.
Is it the same as this yellow here?
No.
Or this yellow here? Or how about this yellow over here?
No.
So we got yellow that's all over the place, but yet, if we look at that yellow, we can assign it a color. Golden yellow. We say that's a golden yellow. Okay? But if we actually analyze it, colors all over the place. All right? So there's a lot of latitude that we have to play with as long as what we look at looks like that golden yellow. All right? But in actuality, we got colors going all over the place. Okay? Where the trick lies is when we take the flower that's on the screen and we print it out and we look at them side by side. That's where the trick is. We want the yellow in the printed page to look the same yellow as what's on the screen. Okay? And it doesn't matter what camera I started off with and what color profile I opened up my raw file in. It only depends on the end results. Okay? So Olympus and Adobe can argue over how to represent golden yellow all they want. It really doesn't matter to me in the end, because I'm going to give a golden yellow that the client is happy with. Not the golden yellow that Adobe is happy with, or the one that Olympus is happy with. Okay? So that's why I say it is very subjective. It's very subjective. Okay? However, again, if the end results, if I get the best end results by using the Olympus Raw View software, then that's the one I'm going to use. Okay? Because that's going to get me to my end results the easiest, the best way possible. All right? If it doesn't matter, it doesn't really matter how you start. All right? The way I look at it, opening it up into the native raw viewer is just an added extra step that I don't want to be dealing with. So hopefully that gives you a couple of ways of looking at it. But the short answer to all that is that yes, the comment was on point. But as you can see, there was a lot more to it. So, but that was a great question.
I hope that didn't confuse Donna. I brought this up because I know Donna is new with the camera and she's figuring things out like the rest of us always do when we get new things. And when she said the pictures coming out darker on Facebook than it is on her screen, I just wonder if there's a translation. I know Facebook does compress a picture, so I don't know if they're doing something. If Facebook is saying, hey, this was an Olympus, I don't like this, I make it dark. I don't have that problem with either my cell camera or my Canon camera.
Yeah.
You know, it's weird because I've seen it happen on both from my phone and from my camera, but it's not on all pictures. It's only on certain ones.
Yeah.
You know, like
there'll
be a certain landscape that it's totally. I'll think I have the perfect brightness and everything. I throw it on Facebook and it looks like the thing was taken.
I have to go to somebody else. Go to somebody else's monitor, or go to somebody else's phone, or go to somebody else's tablet. I mean, the same picture on my three devices do not look the same.
Right.
Sometimes they look the best on the cell phone. Sometimes they look the best on the tablet.
Yeah.
And sometimes neither one of them look any good except on YouTube or on the screen.
The problem that Donna has, I've had that with photos I've posted to Meetup, and I swear, well, they're doing something here.
I don't think they're doing anything. I mean, I'm pretty a little bit on a smidge on the lighter side when I post up on Facebook. And sometimes they come out light, sometimes, whatever device it comes up on, it looks like darker on one, lighter on another.
But it's not even the device. It's like I could do them on my laptop, and I have what I think looks like a great image on my laptop. I'll put it on Facebook, and the thing looks awful.
Go to somebody else's phone, and it might look fine on Facebook.
Yeah, maybe.
What I'm saying is what I'm saying is don't get. My basic point is don't get all hung up on that. Just kind of do the best you can, and however they come out, because if it looks good on your monitor, it may not look good on
but
your boss's phone. I mean, you have no control over that.
That's true.
Right, but I will take it one step further in that respect, Alan. If you are editing on a monitor that is either too bright or too dark, and you edit to that monitor, when you export it and post it on Facebook, that exposure is going to be off. All right?
Yeah, I agree with that. I get that, but it's weird that it only happens on some of them.
That's exactly why I questioned it, is because it wasn't very consistent. All right?
Right.
Should Donna therefore get the color monkey, which would take care of the lighting and take care of the colors?
You can, but most monitors have their own calibration system. You can calibrate to it. But the other aspect is that the time of day or night that you edit will also affect how you edit. If you edit an image during the day and post it, and then at night you edit a different similar image and post it, you may see a discrepancy between the two. So that might be something to look at and see, all right, did I edit this one that's coming out a little darker? Did I edit that one during the day? Because your ambient light is going to play tricks on you with your monitor. Right?
Two things I try to do, and I don't know if this will help. I try to keep the same lighting day and night. It took me a long time to figure out once I moved how I wanted it. I will have the blinds closed. I will have even the door closed, so I'm not getting ambient light from the room window someplace else.
Right.
And I try to edit the same day and night. Also, I have found, and when I'm traveling, I will edit on my laptop. My best editing is always on my 27-inch screen with a desktop at home.
Yes. Yeah. Larger screens do not compress images as much, so you don't get the side effects of that compression. And the
Also,
side effects being, contrast and color shifts or saturation shifts.
Also, I think I don't know about anybody else, but I feel that my 27-inch monitor is a lot better than my laptop monitor. But I have a very cheap laptop just so I can travel, so
Right.
I don't know how that is with other people.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. The quality of the monitor, yeah, it plays a big role. But again, there's something else going on there, because it's not so much the color, it's that exposure value, and it's not exposure values in just, for example, in just the highlights. It's across the board, So that's why I questioned it, is because it was a really weird shift. So, but anyhow, some good questions. Anybody else got anything? Anything they want to ask? Anything they want to add? Jill and Brian's been quiet. Fred's been kind of quiet.
No, I'm good.
Yeah.
Most of the time I just listen when we're talking about Photoshop because I don't use it.
Oh.
But I at least usually glean at least one thing, and that makes for being here, right? I'm listening.
Awesome. Cool.
Jill has posted some good pictures of the polo.
That was fun yesterday.
That unfortunately I had a bicycle accident and I can't walk around as well.
Were you okay then?
I'm getting better, but I'm trying to watch it, and but I saw the pictures that you did, and Ellen and somebody else posted some pictures. Very good.
That was fun. That was my first live action sports thing that I photographed. So.
That's cool. Yeah, it's it's definitely a lot of fun when you can actually be there live and actually doing it. Being in the moment is what makes it for me for photography. It's not so much the end results. Yeah, they're nice to have to prove, but it's the experience that really gets me fired up. So, awesome. Anybody else? Comments? Questions? Concerns? Okay. All right. Again, don't forget, coming up, we got Beyond the Rule of Thirds next month, and I'm going to try to get at least one of the street portraiture workshops scheduled for this month. All right, and it'll most definitely be on a weekend, so Saturday or Sunday.
Hey, Doc,
yeah.
How are your cards coming?
I haven't done anything with them.
Okay,
that's a big project. That requires a big chunk of time for me to devote to it at any one given time, and I just haven't had a chance to devote that time. I still have it though. They're right there, sitting right next to me. I do look at them like almost every day. I just have to devote the time to it. That's all. So.
Okay, just asking.
I appreciate it. Yeah, keep hounding me though. I need that. Where are they? It's a great tool. So we should do that again, even with the cards I do have.
Yeah, we should.
Yeah.
That was fun.
That was maybe we'll get that up before the end of the month as well. So awesome. All right, guys, as always, thank you for joining me. Thank you for hanging out. I really appreciate the questions that you asked. They were very awesome. And if you are a Patreon member, again, my gratitude is beyond description. I really appreciate your support. Until next time, next Monday will be Q&A, so get your questions ready, and I'll hope to be able to help you out. And in the meantime, awesome. In the meantime, just keep an eye on the Facebook page, all right, for updates.
Thank you,
All right.
Doug.
All right, guys.
Have a nice week.
Take care.
Thank you.
Be safe. No more
Thank you.
downhill. No more downhill biking for you, Bill.
Okay.
All right, guys. Take care.
Thank you for watching Learning Photography with Duck. Brought to you in association with Milford Photo, your local full-service camera store. Located in downtown Milford, Connecticut, Milford Photo offers you a personalized shopping experience. From the latest camera gear to printing and framing services. And, of course, educational workshops to teach you the finer aspects of photography. Don't forget to tell them Duck sent you.